The gunshot echoed across the vast Montana prairie as Abigail Harlow watched her world collapse for the second time in her 22 years. It was 1876, and the frontier offered no mercy to a woman with blood on her hands, even if that blood belonged to the man who'd threatened to end her life. As the U.S. Marshal's body crumpled to the ground, his badge catching the last light of the setting sun, Abigail knew her fate was sealed. The wind whipped through Abigail's auburn hair as she urged her horse forward, away from the small town of Silver Creek that had been her home for the past year. The saddlebag held only essentials: a change of clothes, a small pouch of coins saved from her work at the town's boarding house, and her father's revolver now with one bullet less. Her hands trembled against the reins, the phantom feeling of the trigger still pressed against her finger. Marshal Delaney had been respected in town, but Abigail knew his true nature. For months he had cornered her with unwanted advances, threats veiled as compliments. Tonight, when she'd refused him one final time, he'd shown his true colors, grabbing her, tearing at her dress. She hadn't meant to kill him. The gun had been for protection, a warning, but when he'd laughed at her threat and lunged forward, instinct took over. Now she was running, a fugitive in a land where justice rarely favored women, especially those without family or fortune to shield them. 3 days of hard riding left Abigail exhausted, her supplies dwindling as quickly as her hope. She'd avoided the main trails, keeping to the wilderness where possible, but her inexperience in the wild was becoming dangerous. The late spring nights were cold, and game was scarce for someone with limited hunting skills. On the 4th morning, she woke to the sound of approaching horses. Scrambling to her feet, Abigail grabbed her father's revolver and positioned herself behind a boulder, heart hammering against her ribs. "I know you're there," a deep voice called out. "I'm not looking for trouble." Abigail remained silent, finger hovering near the trigger. "You left a trail even a blind man could follow," the voice continued. "You're lucky it was me who found you and not someone else." "Stay back," Abigail finally called, her voice cracking from disuse and fear. A tall figure emerged from between the pines, leading a chestnut stallion. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but Abigail could make out a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Name's Quinn Eastwood," he said, not moving any closer. "I work the Broken Spur Ranch about 20 miles east. Found your campfire smoke yesterday evening." "I don't need help," Abigail replied, though her parched lips and trembling hands suggested otherwise. Quinn Eastwood tilted his head slightly. "Maybe not, but your horse does. Left front shoes coming loose. He won't make it another day without going lame." Abigail's eyes darted to her tethered mare. The animal did seem to be favoring one leg. "I can fix it," Quinn continued, "and be on my way. Or you can keep running until that horse gives out and you're stranded in cougar country with night coming on." Abigail weighed her options. The stranger seemed straightforward enough, but trusting anyone felt dangerous. Still, he was right about the horse. "Fine," she conceded. "Fix the shoe, then leave." Quinn nodded, moving slowly toward the mare with practiced ease. From his saddlebag, he produced basic farrier tools. Abigail watched him work, the revolver still clutched in her hand. "You got a name?" he asked without looking up. "No," she replied flatly. His hands moved efficiently, removing the loose shoe, cleaning the hoof, and resetting the metal with fresh nails he'd brought along. "Well, no," he said with the hint of a smile. "You're headed the wrong direction if you're trying to get anywhere with supplies. Nothing but mountains and wilderness for at least 60 miles the way you're going." Abigail remained silent, but her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. Quinn finished with the horse, patted its flank, and stood up. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a package wrapped in cloth. "Jerky and cornbread," he said, placing it on a flat rock between them. "Not fancy, but it'll keep you going." "Why are you helping me?" Abigail asked, suspicion lacing her voice. Quinn wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-weathered skin. "Because someone helped me once when I was running from something I couldn't face," he answered simply. "Good day to you, no." He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode away, leaving Abigail staring after him with the food untouched on the rock. That night, as she ate the cornbread and jerky, the best meal she'd had in days, Abigail considered her options. She couldn't keep running aimlessly. She needed a plan, somewhere to go where no one would look for her. By morning, she'd made her decision. The cowboy had mentioned the Broken Spur Ranch. Perhaps there was work to be found in the vicinity. Ranches always needed cooks, laundresses, or other help. She could change her name, create a new history for herself, and disappear into the anonymity of frontier life. 2 days later, Abigail arrived at a small settlement named Cottonwood Springs. It wasn't much a general store, a saloon, a small church, and scattered houses, but it represented possibility. She'd rehearsed her story carefully. She was Annie Hollister, recently widowed, traveling to join relatives in Oregon but in need of temporary work to replenish her funds. The general store owner, Mrs. Fenton, a sharp-eyed woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, listened to Abigail's practiced tale with obvious skepticism. "Widow, you say? You seem mighty young for that misfortune." "Life doesn't always consider age, madam," Abigail replied, maintaining steady eye contact despite her racing heart. Mrs. Fenton studied her for another uncomfortable moment. "Well, I don't need help here, but Miller's restaurant down the street lost their serving girl last week. Eloped with a cattle driver passing through. You might try there." Abigail thanked her and made her way to the small eatery. Mr. Miller, a round man with a perpetually sweaty brow, hired her on the spot after she demonstrated she could read, write, and calculate simple sums. "Rooms upstairs, small but clean," he explained. "Meals included, $2 a week plus whatever tips you earn. We serve breakfast and supper daily except Sundays." It wasn't much, but it was a start, a place to hide to plan her next move. Abigail quickly settled into a routine. She rose before dawn to help prepare for breakfast, worked until mid-morning, had a few hours to herself, then returned for the evening rush. The work was exhausting but straightforward, and the patrons were mostly ranch hands and townspeople who asked few questions. For 2 weeks, she managed to avoid drawing attention to herself. She kept conversation minimal, deflected personal questions with vague answers, and saved every coin she earned. At night, she would sometimes wake in a cold sweat, the sound of Marshal Delaney's final grunt echoing in her ears. Then, on a busy Saturday evening, the door to Miller's restaurant swung open and Quinn Eastwood walked in. Abigail nearly dropped the plates she was carrying. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and recognition flashed in his. To her relief, he gave no indication that he knew her, merely taking a seat at an empty table near the window. When she approached to take his order, he looked up with a neutral expression. "Evening. Coffee and whatever's hot, please." "Yes, sir," she replied, voice carefully controlled. As she turned to leave, he added quietly, "Good to see you found your way, no." The nickname, such as it was, sent a jolt through her. When she returned with his coffee, he was engaged in conversation with another rancher, and she managed to serve him without further exchange. Throughout his meal, Abigail felt his occasional glance, but he made no attempt to speak with her again. When he left, he placed his payment on the table with a generous tip and departed with a simple nod in her direction. That night, Abigail barely slept. Had he recognized her from wanted posters? Would he report her to the local sheriff? By morning, she'd convinced herself she needed to move on, find another town, another identity. She was packing her meager possessions when a knock came at her door. Heart pounding, Abigail reached for her father's revolver before calling out, "Who is it?" "Quinn Eastwood," came the reply. "I'd like a word if you don't mind." Abigail hesitated, mind racing. There was no back exit from her small room. "Please," he added. "I'm alone, and I mean you no harm." Keeping the gun behind her skirts, Abigail opened the door a crack. Quinn stood in the hallway, hat in hand, his expression serious but not threatening. "May I come in?" What I have to say shouldn't be heard in a hallway. After a moment's hesitation, she stepped back, allowing him entry but keeping her distance. Quinn glanced at the half-packed bag on her bed. "Running again. What do you want?" Abigail demanded. "To help," he said simply. "I know trouble when I see it, been around it enough. You don't know anything about me. I know you're scared, I know you're alone." His voice remained steady, matter-of-fact. "And I suspect I know why you're on the run, Abigail Harlow." The sound of her real name froze her blood. "How newspaper from Silver Creek came through yesterday. There's a reward for information about a young woman wanted for questioning in Marshal Delaney's death." Quinn's expression softened slightly. "They say he was shot with his own gun after an altercation." "It wasn't his gun," Abigail whispered, then immediately regretted the admission. "I figured as much." Quinn took a cautious step forward. "Look, I'm not here to turn you in. But running like this, always looking over your shoulder, that's no life." "What choice do I have?" Abigail's voice cracked. "A woman who kills a lawman doesn't get justice. She gets a noose." "There might be another way," Quinn suggested. "My employer, Mr. Reeves at the Broken Spur, needs a housekeeper. His place is isolated, miles from town. You'd have room and board, fair wages, and most importantly, privacy." Abigail eyed him suspiciously. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" "Peace of mind, knowing I didn't leave someone to face wolves, human or otherwise, alone." He paused. "I've seen what happens to women with no protection in these territories." "I can protect myself," Abigail said, hand tightening around the hidden revolver. "I believe you can," Quinn agreed. "But everyone needs allies, especially in a land like this." Abigail considered his offer. Working at her remote ranch would certainly provide better cover than a public restaurant in town. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked finally. "You don't," Quinn admitted. "Just like I don't know I can trust that you're not exactly what that poster says you are. Sometimes faith is all we've got out here." After a long moment, Abigail nodded. "When would I start?" "Today, if you're willing. I've got an extra horse." By noon, Abigail found herself riding alongside Quinn Eastwood toward the Broken Spur Ranch. The spring countryside was beginning to green, wildflowers dotting the rolling prairie in splashes of color. Under different circumstances, she might have found the journey beautiful. "Mr. Reeves knows nothing about your situation," Quinn explained as they rode. "As far as he's concerned, you're Annie Hollister, a widow looking for respectable work away from town. He's not one to pry into personal matters." "And the other workers?" "Just a few ranch hands, the cook old Pablo, who barely speaks English, and Mr. Reeves's foreman, Sam Tucker. They won't ask questions as long as you do your job." As they crested a hill, the Broken Spur came into view, a sprawling main house with several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse, nestled in a valley beside a creek lined with cottonwoods. "It's larger than I expected," Abigail commented. "Mr. Reeves started with nothing 20 years ago," Quinn replied. "Built it all himself, acre by acre, head of cattle by head of cattle. He's a good man to work for fair, if somewhat reserved." Mr. Reeves proved to be exactly as described, a taciturn widower in his 60s with a weathered face and calloused hands. He asked few questions during their brief interview, seeming satisfied with Abigail's fabricated references and Quinn's vouching for her character. "Rooms at the back of the house," he explained gruffly. "Meals with the men at regular times, Sundays free if you want them, $5 a week plus room and board." "Thank you, sir," Abigail replied. "I'll work hard, see that you do." With that, he returned to his account books, effectively dismissing them. Life at the Broken Spur quickly fell into a predictable rhythm. Abigail rose before dawn to prepare the house for the day, served meals alongside Pablo, maintained the household linens, and kept the main house clean. The work was demanding but straightforward, and the isolation of the ranch provided a sense of security she hadn't felt since before Marshal Delaney's death. Quinn Eastwood was often absent, working with cattle on the far reaches of the ranch's extensive property. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a respectful distance. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between concern and curiosity. As weeks passed, Abigail began to relax slightly, allowing herself small pleasures: a book borrowed from Mr. Reeves's modest library, walks along the creek in the evenings, conversations with Pablo, who proved more talkative than Quinn had suggested once she showed interest in his Mexican heritage. Summer arrived, bringing long, hot days and the rhythms of ranch life: branding, mending fences, preparing for the eventual cattle drive in early fall. Abigail found unexpected satisfaction in the steady work and simple routine. One evening in late July, she was returning from the creek with freshly washed linens when she encountered Quinn repairing a saddle on the porch of the bunkhouse. "Evening, Miss Hollister," he called, using her false name as he always did in the presence of others, though they were currently alone. "Mr. Eastwood," she acknowledged with a nod, continuing toward the main house. "Hold up a minute," he said, setting aside his work. "Got something for you." Curious, Abigail paused as Quinn disappeared into the bunkhouse, returning moments later with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Noticed you reading through Mr. Reeves's books. Thought you might like something new." He handed her the package, an almost shy expression crossing his typically composed features. Balancing the laundry basket on her hip, Abigail unwrapped the gift to find a copy of Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. "It's not new," Quinn said quickly. "Got it from the bookshop in Cottonwood Springs. Lady there said it's popular with," he hesitated, "with educated women." Abigail ran her fingers over the cover, touched by the unexpected thoughtfulness. "Thank you. I've wanted to read this since it was published." A rare smile transformed Quinn's face, softening the hard lines earned from years of outdoor work. "Good, that's good." An awkward silence fell between them before Abigail gestured toward the house. "I should get these linens hung before dark." "Of course," Quinn nodded, returning to his saddle repair. "Enjoy the book." That night, after her chores were complete, Abigail lit the lamp in her small room and opened Quinn's gift. Inside the front cover, written in a surprisingly neat hand, was an inscription: "To A.H., may you find the peace you seek, Q.E." The use of her true initials startled her, though she understood the discretion behind it. More surprising was the sentiment itself: simple, direct, yet oddly intimate. Over the following weeks, Abigail found herself seeking Quinn's company more frequently. Their conversations, initially halting and careful, gradually flowed more naturally. She learned he had been orphaned young, raised by an uncle who taught him ranching before drinking himself to death when Quinn was 17. He'd been on his own since, working ranches across 3 territories before settling at the Broken Spur 5 years earlier. In turn, she shared carefully edited versions of her own past: her father's death in the war, her mother's subsequent decline, her efforts to make her way independently. She never mentioned Silver Creek or Marshal Delaney, and Quinn never asked, though sometimes she caught a look in his eyes that suggested he understood the gaps in her narrative. August brought a violent thunderstorm that lasted 3 days, confining everyone to the buildings and fraying tempers all around. On the 3rd evening, with rain still pounding the roof, Abigail found herself alone in the kitchen after dinner, the men having retreated to the bunkhouse with a bottle of whiskey to pass the time. The back door opened suddenly, admitting a gust of wind and a thoroughly soaked Quinn. He carried an injured lamb, its white wool stained with blood. "Found it trapped in a ravine," he explained, water dripping from his hat onto the clean floor. "Mother's nowhere in sight, probably lost in the storm." Without hesitation, Abigail cleared the kitchen table. "Put it here." Together, they examined the lamb's injury: a deep gash along its hind leg, likely from sharp rocks in the ravine. Working silently in tandem, they cleaned and bandaged the wound, then created a makeshift pen by the kitchen stove using wooden crates. "It'll need feeding every few hours," Quinn said, finally removing his dripping hat and coat. "I can take it to the barn if it's too much trouble." "No," Abigail replied, surprising herself with her vehemence. It needs warmth. I'll tend to it. Quinn studied her for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. As he turned to leave, Abigail impulsively caught his arm. You're soaked through. At least have some coffee before going back out in that downpour. He hesitated, then agreed. While Abigail poured the coffee, Quinn removed his sodden boots, revealing a hole in one sock. The unexpected vulnerability of that small imperfection touched something in Abigail. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain and the occasional bleat from the lamb. When Quinn finally spoke, his voice was low, almost contemplative. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever have a place that's truly mine, he said. A home, not just a bunk in someone else's house. What would that look like? Abigail asked, curious about this glimpse into his private thoughts. Nothing fancy, good land with water, a solid house, some cattle, horses. He looked into his coffee cup as if it held the vision he described. Maybe someone to share it with someday. The simple honesty of his dream resonated with Abigail, reminding her of her own abandoned hopes for a normal life, hopes she'd set aside the moment she pulled the trigger on Marshal Delaney. What about you? Quinn asked. What would you want if you could have anything? Peace, she answered without hesitation. Just peace, and maybe forgiveness. Quinn's eyes met hers, understanding passing between them. Some things we can't undo, he said quietly, but that doesn't mean we don't deserve a future. Abigail looked away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. Some crimes can't be forgiven. Maybe, Quinn conceded, but I believe in redemption, in second chances. Before she could respond, the back door flew open again, this time admitting Sam Tucker, the foreman, his expression urgent. Quinn, riders coming. 5 of them, moving fast despite the storm. Quinn was on his feet instantly, tension radiating from him. Get Mr. Reeves and the others. Make sure everyone's armed. As Tucker disappeared, Quinn turned to Abigail. Stay inside, away from windows. Could be nothing, or it could be someone looking for me, she finished, fear clutching at her heart. Quinn didn't deny it. If it is, we'll handle it, but let me do the talking. Minutes later, hoofbeats approached through the rain, followed by voices calling out in the yard. Quinn grabbed his still damp hat and gave Abigail one last look before heading outside to meet the visitors. Abigail moved to the window despite his warning, peering through a gap in the curtains. 5 men on horseback faced the porch where Quinn, Mr. Reeves, and the ranch hands had assembled. The leader of the group, a tall man wearing what appeared to be an official badge, was speaking to Mr. Reeves. Though she couldn't hear the conversation, Abigail's blood ran cold when the man produced a piece of paper, undoubtedly a wanted poster with her description. Quinn said something that made the leader look at him sharply. Unable to bear the suspense, Abigail moved closer to the door, straining to hear. No women here except our housekeeper, Quinn was saying. Mrs. Hollister is a widow from back east, been with us nearly 3 months. We'd like to see this Mrs. Hollister, the badge-wearing man replied, just to be certain. She's not to be disturbed, Mr. Reeves interjected, surprising Abigail. Took sick yesterday with fever. Doc Watson from town's been by, confined her to bed. The leader seemed skeptical. This woman we're looking for is wanted for killing a U.S. Marshal in Silver Creek, dangerous criminal. I understand your duty, Quinn replied evenly, but you can see our situation. Storm's been raging for days, creek's nearly at flood stage and night's coming on. Why not make camp in the bunkhouse tonight, and in the morning, when Mrs. Hollister's fever might have broken, you can see for yourself she's not who you're looking for. After some deliberation, the men agreed, following Sam Tucker toward the bunkhouse while Mr. Reeves and Quinn remained on the porch, speaking in low tones. Abigail backed away from the door, mind racing. This was the moment she'd been dreading since fleeing Silver Creek. By morning, she needed to be gone, leaving behind the fragile security she'd found at Broken Spur. Quinn entered the kitchen minutes later, his expression grim. U.S. Marshal and deputies, he confirmed. Looking for Abigail Harlow, wanted for questioning in the death of Marshal James Delaney in Silver Creek, Montana Territory. I have to leave, Abigail said, already mentally cataloging what she could quickly pack. Tonight, while they're settled in the bunkhouse. And go where? Quinn challenged. In this storm, with law enforcement likely watching every town and settlement for 100 miles. I don't know, she admitted, fighting panic. But I can't stay here and risk bringing trouble to you all. Mr. Reeves knows, Quinn said quietly. Abigail stared at him in shock. You told him. Didn't have to. He figured it out weeks ago, said he recognized a person running from something. Quinn stepped closer. He's willing to back our story, says it's his business who he hires, not the government's. Why would he risk that for me? Because good help is hard to find, Quinn replied with the hint of a smile. And because he believes in second chances too. The plan they devised was simple but risky. Abigail would remain hidden in her room, supposedly suffering from a contagious fever. Pablo, who had once worked as a physician's assistant in Mexico, would attest to her condition. If the Marshals insisted on seeing her anyway, they had prepared a convincing tableau Abigail in bed with her face obscured by bandages for a supposed scalding accident that accompanied her fever. Morning arrived with clearing skies and mounting tension. Abigail lay in bed, heart pounding as she heard voices in the main house. Quinn had coached her breathe shallowly, moan occasionally, speak in a whisper if addressed directly. The door to her room opened, admitting Mr. Reeves, Pablo, and two men she assumed were Marshals. As you can see, gentlemen, Mr. Reeves was saying, Mrs. Hollister is in no condition for questioning. Poor woman took a bad turn when the kettle spilled 2 days ago. One of the Marshals stepped closer to the bed. Madam, sorry to disturb you, just need to confirm a few details. Abigail gave a weak moan, turning slightly toward the voice but keeping her bandaged face partially obscured by the blanket. What is your full name and place of birth? The Marshal asked. Annie Hollister, Abigail whispered, born Philadelphia. And how long have you been employed at the Broken Spur? Since May, she managed, following the story they'd rehearsed. The Marshal asked several more questions, which Abigail answered in the same feeble manner. Finally, Pablo stepped forward, speaking with authority despite his broken English. Patient need rest now. Fever very dangerous. You go. The Marshals exchanged glances, then nodded to Mr. Reeves. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be moving on. Once the door closed, Abigail lay still, barely breathing until Mr. Reeves returned several minutes later. They're gone, he confirmed. Convinced you're not who they're looking for, but they left this. He handed her the wanted poster bearing her name and a rough sketch that, while not perfectly accurate, was close enough to be concerning. I'm sorry for bringing this to your door, Abigail said, sitting up and removing the unnecessary bandages. Mr. Reeves waved away her apology. Woman defending herself isn't something I'd condemn. Quinn told me the basics of your situation. Way I see it, a man who abuses his position to threaten a woman deserves whatever comes his way. His matter-of-fact acceptance of her situation brought unexpected tears to Abigail's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Mr. Reeves nodded once, then left her alone with her thoughts. By afternoon, life at the ranch had returned to its normal rhythms. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean landscape and urgent work to repair storm damage. Abigail kept to her regular duties, though her mind remained turbulent with the close call, and the realization that her secret was now known to both Quinn and Mr. Reeves. As dusk approached, she found Quinn mending a section of fence near the creek. Without preamble, she asked the question that had been troubling her all day. Why did you help me? You've risked everything, your job, your freedom for someone you barely know. Quinn continued working for a moment before setting down his tools and turning to face her. I know enough, he said simply. I know you're kind to old Pablo when others dismiss him. I know you save scraps for the barn cats and read poetry by lamplight. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met, like you're trying to earn your place in the world every single day. He took a step closer. And I know that whatever happened in Silver Creek, you're not a cold-blooded killer. The rest doesn't matter to me. It should, Abigail insisted. I took a man's life. And I believe you had reason, Quinn replied steadily. Sometimes survival requires terrible choices. The understanding in his eyes was too much for Abigail. The truth spilled out of her Marshal Delaney's months of harassment, his final attack, the gun she'd kept hidden, the shot that ended his life. I didn't mean to kill him, she finished, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted him to stop. Quinn's hand reached for hers, a simple touch that anchored her as the emotions washed through. You survived, he said gently. That's what matters. As summer gave way to autumn, something shifted between Abigail and Quinn. Their conversations grew longer, their shared glances more meaningful. During the cattle drive, when Quinn was away for 2 weeks, Abigail found herself watching the horizon each evening, waiting for the first sign of the returning cowboys. When he finally rode in, dusty and exhausted from the trail, the smile that broke across his face at the sight of her waiting on the porch told Abigail everything she needed to know about his feelings. That night, after the celebration dinner for the successful drive, Quinn asked her to walk with him down to the creek. Under a canopy of stars, he spoke of his plans land of his own, a small ranch he'd been saving for over the past 5 years. Mr. Reeves has offered to sell me the north section, he explained. Good water rights, enough grazing for a modest herd, I've nearly got the money. That's wonderful, Abigail said sincerely. You'll be an excellent rancher. Quinn turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. I don't want to do it alone. The implication hung in the air between them, making Abigail's heart race, yet the shadows of her past loomed large. Quinn, I can't. There's still a price on my head. I could bring danger to your door. We'd face it together, he said simply. Besides, Mr. Reeves has connections. He's been making inquiries discreetly. The case against you isn't as strong as those marshals made it seem. Delaney had a reputation, it turns out. Other women have come forward since his death. Hope fluttered in Abigail's chest, quickly extinguished by reality. It doesn't matter, I still pulled the trigger. Self-defense isn't murder, Quinn insisted. With the right lawyer, the right witnesses, even if that were true, Abigail interrupted, I don't deserve this. A good man, a future, a chance at happiness, not after what I've done. I don't deserve a good man, she whispered, looking away from him. Quinn gently turned her face back toward his. Then deserve me anyway, he said softly. Deserve me because you're brave and strong, and because I love you, Abigail Harlow. Deserve me because I choose you, past and all. The simplicity of his declaration broke something open inside her. For the first time since that fateful night in Silver Creek, Abigail allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival, a future with love, purpose, belonging. I'm afraid, she admitted. So am I, Quinn replied honestly, but I'd rather face whatever comes with you than be safe without you. When he kissed her, it felt like a promise, not that everything would be perfect, but that whatever came, they would face it together. Winter came early to Montana that year, blanketing the Broken Spur in snow by November. Abigail and Quinn were married in a small ceremony in Mr. Reeves's parlor, with Pablo, the ranch hands, and a visiting circuit preacher as witnesses. She wore a simple blue dress ordered from a catalog, and Quinn wore the only suit he owned, purchased years earlier for a funeral. Mr. Reeves's wedding gift was unexpected legal papers drawn up by a lawyer friend in Helena, documenting the full sale of the north section to Quinn, with terms so generous they left the young couple speechless. Been saving this land for someone who'd love it proper, the older man explained gruffly. Figure you two will. By spring, they had built a modest home on their property, 3 rooms with a front porch facing the mountains and plans for expansion as their family grew. Quinn's small herd of cattle grazed on the hillsides, and Abigail had planted a vegetable garden that promised summer abundance. The legal shadow over Abigail's head remained, but its darkness had diminished. Mr. Reeves's lawyer friend had filed affidavits from other women harassed by Marshal Delaney, creating enough doubt about the circumstances of his death that the territory's prosecutor had quietly set the case aside, not formally closed. but no longer actively pursued. On a warm evening in May, exactly 1 year after Abigail had first arrived at the Broken Spur, she and Quinn sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, where their first child was growing. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Quinn. Taking a chance on someone with such a complicated past. Quinn's hand covered hers, his wedding band catching the last light of day. "Not for a single moment," he replied. "Some people search their whole lives for the kind of love we've found." Abigail leaned against his shoulder, finally accepting the truth of his words. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't define her future. Here, with Quinn and their growing family, she had found not just safety but belonging, a place where her strength was valued, her past accepted, and her heart fully loved. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Quinn's arm tightened around her as the first stars appeared in the deepening sky. "That's what love does," he said simply. "It sees the truth of a person beyond their darkest moments or deepest fears." Together, they watched night claim the land that was now truly theirs, not just in legal documents, but in the deeper sense of having found their rightful place in the world and in each other's hearts.